Imagine the version of you that walks into chaos and doesn't flinch. Not because nothing hurts, but because you've learned what soldiers learn. That pain is information, not instruction. That fear is a tool, not a truth. That rage can be harnessed like electricity, dangerous when wild, unstoppable when channeled. Han Fei's philosophy creates this person, not through repression or pretending, but through an ancient, surgical understanding. Your emotions were never meant to lead you. They were meant to serve you. And the moment you reclaim that hierarchy, everything changes. That version of you already exists, not in some distant future after years of therapy or spiritual practice. It exists right now, buried under layers of conditioning that taught you emotions are masters you must obey. But what if I told you that every single moment you've spent drowning in your feelings, every panic attack that hijacked your afternoon, every surge of rage that made you say things you can't take back, what if all of that happened because no one ever taught you the most fundamental truth about being human? That emotions are not you. They're signals. They're forces. They're tools. And tools don't get to decide how you use them. I want you to see something clearly before we go any further. You've been lied to about emotional control. Not by bad people. Not even intentionally. But you've been lied to nonetheless. Modern psychology tells you to sit with your feelings, to validate every impulse, to treat your inner world like a democracy where every emotion gets a vote, where fear has just as much say as courage, where sadness can veto your dreams, where anger can overrule your wisdom. And this sounds compassionate. It sounds healing. It sounds like progress. But Han Fei, the strategist who understood power at its coldest, most surgical level, knew something different. He knew that emotions are not citizens. They're weapons. And weapons don't need therapy. They need training. They need a commander who understands their purpose, their power, and their limits. Someone who knows when to deploy them and when to keep them sheathed. This isn't a video about becoming cold. It's not about shutting down or pretending you don't feel. It's about something far more radical and far more liberating. It's about learning to train your emotions like a soldier trains for war, not by suppressing them, but by organizing them, by transforming the chaos inside you into cold, reliable power, by understanding that the ability to not react is not weakness. It's the ultimate form of strength. What I'm going to share with you comes from a philosopher most people have never heard of. Han Fei lived over 2,000 years ago in ancient China during a time called the Warring States period. Imagine a world where kingdoms rose and fell like waves, where one wrong decision meant not just personal failure, but the extinction of entire bloodlines. In that world, emotional control wasn't a luxury. It was survival. And Han Fei, watching kings lose their thrones because they couldn't master themselves, wrote something that still cuts through every piece of modern self-help advice like a blade through silk. He said that power doesn't come from what you do. It comes from what you don't do, from what you refuse to reveal, from your ability to remain unmoved while everything around you burns. He called it the strategy of cold power. And what made it so dangerous, so effective, is that it doesn't rely on strength or charisma or talent. It relies on one thing only: your ability to govern yourself. Now, before you think this sounds harsh or inhuman, let me be clear. Han Fei wasn't advocating for becoming a robot. He wasn't saying you should feel nothing. He was saying something far more nuanced and far more powerful. He was saying that emotions are incredible forces, like fire, like water, like electricity. And just like those forces, they can build cities or burn them down. The difference isn't in the force itself. It's in whether you control it or it controls you. Think about a soldier for a moment. Not the Hollywood version, the real one. A soldier walking into combat doesn't stop feeling fear. Their heart races. Their hands might shake. Every instinct in their body is screaming run, hide, survive. But they don't obey those instincts. They acknowledge them. They feel the fear fully. And then they act according to their training, their mission, their purpose. The fear is there. It's real. It's valid. But it's not in command. That's what I'm talking about. That's the shift. Most of us go through life thinking that feeling an emotion means we have to obey it. We feel anxious, so we avoid. We feel angry, so we lash out. We feel sad, so we collapse. We've been taught that this is authenticity, that this is being real, that denying these impulses would be repression. But there's a massive difference between feeling your emotions and being ruled by them. And that difference is where all your power lives. Let me tell you a story. Han Fei wrote about a general who, before every battle, would do something unusual. He would visit the families of his soldiers, not to comfort them, not to make speeches about honor or glory. He would simply observe. He would watch which men wept when they said goodbye to their mothers and which men stayed silent. And here's what's interesting. He didn't automatically trust the silent ones more. In fact, he was suspicious of them. What he was looking for was something specific. He watched for the soldiers who could choose when to show emotion. One soldier would cry privately with his mother, fully and without shame, and then stand stone-faced before his unit when it was time to march. Another soldier showed no emotion anywhere, not with his family, not with his brothers in arms, not alone. The general promoted the first soldier and dismissed the second. When his advisors asked why, he said something that still echoes across centuries. He said the soldier who could choose his emotional display had mastery. He could feel deeply, love fully, and still function when it mattered. But the soldier who showed nothing had only numbness. And numb men break when the real pressure comes. Because numbness isn't strength. It's just frozen fear. It's emotion that's been pushed down so hard it can't move anymore. And when you can't move, you can't adapt. And when you can't adapt, you die. This is the paradox at the heart of everything I'm going to teach you. Emotional control is an absence. It's choice. It's knowing when to let the river flow and when to dam it completely. It's being able to cry with your mother and then walk into battle with dry eyes. Not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've learned that feelings are servants, not masters. They inform your decisions. They don't make them. Now let me tell you another story, because this one goes even deeper. In ancient China, an emperor hired an assassin to kill a political rival. This wasn't unusual for the time. What was unusual was what happened after. The assassin succeeded. The rival died. The mission was complete. But when the assassin returned to receive his payment, the emperor noticed something. The man was shaking. He couldn't sleep. He was haunted in a way he'd never been before, even though he'd killed many times in his career. The emperor asked him, "Why does this disturb you? You've killed before. What's different now?" And the assassin said something that made the emperor go silent. He said, "Before, I killed with anger. I killed because someone wronged me or because I was defending someone I loved. I had emotions to wrap around the act. I could tell myself the rage made me do it, that the fear pushed my hand, that I had no choice. But this time you hired me. I had no personal stake, no emotion to hide behind. I killed with nothing, just cold execution of task. And when you do violence with no emotion to blame it on, you see yourself clearly, and that sight is unbearable." The emperor understood immediately what the assassin was confessing. Emotions are not just forces inside you. They're excuses. They're shields. They let you act without taking full responsibility. When you say I was angry, what you're really saying is it wasn't really me, it was the anger. When you say I was terrified, you're saying I had no choice. The fear chose for me. Emotions become the story you tell yourself about why you're not accountable for your actions. But the soldier, the true master, acts without that comfort. He doesn't get to say the fear made me retreat or the anger made me attack. He owns every choice completely, fully, nakedly. This is why emotional control is terrifying. Because when you stop letting emotions be your excuse, you have to face the raw reality of your own agency. You have to admit that you chose, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when every cell in your body was screaming otherwise. And this is also why emotional control is so liberating. Because once you stop blaming your emotions for your choices, you stop being their prisoner. You become free in a way most people never experience. Free to feel everything and obey nothing that doesn't serve you. So if emotions aren't meant to lead and numbness is a trap, what's the third way? What did Han Fei see that we've forgotten? This is where everything clicks into place. This is where the entire philosophy reveals itself. Han Fei understood that emotions are not truth. They're lobbying. Let me say that again because it's crucial. Your emotions are not telling you the truth about reality. They're lobbying for a particular behavior. Your fear doesn't know the future. It's just pushing you toward avoidance because that's its job. Your anger doesn't know justice. It's pushing you toward destruction because that's what anger does. Your sadness doesn't know what you need. It's pushing you toward isolation because that's how sadness protects the wound. Each emotion is like a lobbyist in a government, coming to you with an urgent agenda, making it seem like the only possible course of action is the one they're suggesting. And in a kingdom, a wise ruler listens to all the lobbyists. He hears their arguments. He considers their perspectives, but he doesn't obey any of them reflexively. He makes his own decision based on what serves the kingdom, not what serves the lobbyist's narrow interest. You have to become that ruler. You have to become the king or queen of your inner court. When fear comes to you and says we must run, you listen. You say thank you for that input. I understand you're trying to protect me. And then you ask, does running actually serve me here? Is this fear based on real danger or imagined threat? Would courage serve me better? And you decide, not from the panic, from the throne. When anger comes and says we must destroy this person who wronged us, you listen. You say, I hear you. I feel your fire. I know you think justice means vengeance. And then you ask, will this destruction move me toward my goals or away from them? Will I respect myself tomorrow if I act on this rage today? And you decide, not from the heat, from the throne. This is what Han Fei meant by cold power, not heartless power. Cold power, the temperature of a decision made without the distortion of emotional heat. A decision made from clarity. And here's what's beautiful. When you make decisions this way, you're not suppressing the emotion. You're integrating it. You're using its information without being used by its agenda. Think of it like this. Imagine you're driving and your car's engine light comes on. That light is information. It's telling you something needs attention. But you don't pull over immediately every single time a light flickers. You assess. Is the car overheating? Am I hearing strange noises? How far am I from my destination? You use the information to make a decision. You don't let the light drive the car. That's what your emotions are. Dashboard lights. Incredibly valuable. Sometimes life-saving. But they don't get to steer. You steer. And the moment you really understand this, the moment it moves from concept to lived reality, your entire life changes. Because you realize you've been letting the warning lights drive. You've been slamming on the brakes every time the check engine light came on, pulling over every time the low fuel indicator blinked, panicking every time any signal appeared on the dashboard. And I get it. I really do. Because we've been taught to do this. We've been taught that ignoring your emotions is dangerous, that suppressing feelings leads to explosion, that authenticity means following every impulse. And there's truth in those warnings. Suppression is dangerous. Ignoring emotions is toxic. But there's a massive, crucial difference between suppression and discipline. Suppression is pretending the emotion isn't there. It's shoving it down, denying it, saying I'm fine when you're falling apart. That's like ignoring the check engine light by putting tape over it. The problem doesn't go away. It just gets worse in the dark. Discipline is acknowledging the emotion fully and choosing your response anyway. It's saying I see you, I feel you, and I'm going to act based on wisdom rather than impulse. That's using the information from the dashboard to make a smart choice about where to drive and when to stop. Han Fei saw this distinction clearly. He watched rulers lose their kingdoms because they couldn't distinguish between feeling and following. A king would feel insulted by an ambassador and start a war that destroyed his people. A general would feel afraid and retreat when holding position would have won the battle. A minister would feel greedy and steal from the treasury, losing everything for a momentary gain. And over, Han Fei documented the same pattern. Emotions make terrible commanders. But here's where it gets really interesting. Han Fei also documented what happens when people go the other direction and shut down completely. He wrote about leaders who trusted no one, felt nothing, showed nothing. And they didn't last either. They were overthrown by their own people or betrayed by advisors they'd alienated. Because a leader without emotional intelligence is blind. They can't read people. They can't inspire loyalty. They can't connect. They're all strategy and no humanity. So what's the solution? How do you walk this razor's edge between emotional chaos and emotional shutdown? This is where the soldier metaphor becomes so powerful. A soldier doesn't eliminate fear. They train it. They rehearse scenarios until the fear response happens, but doesn't override the training. They practice until I'm terrified and I'm executing my mission can exist simultaneously. You could train your emotions the same way. Not by making them go away, by making them obedient. And I know that word might make you uncomfortable. We've been taught that obedience is a bad word, that it means submission or weakness. But think about what it means for a soldier's body to be obedient to their will. It means when they tell their legs to run toward danger instead of away from it, the legs obey. When they tell their hands to stay steady, even though they're shaking, the hands obey. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Your emotions can be trained to obey your values instead of your impulses. To obey your long-term vision instead of your short-term comfort. To obey your chosen identity instead of your habitual patterns. But like any training, it takes practice. It takes repetition. It takes failing and trying again. And it takes understanding some core principles that make the training actually work. The first principle is this. Silence is a weapon they can't confiscate. Let me unpack that because it's subtle but devastating in its power. The world is constantly trying to provoke you. People insult you to get a reaction. Situations push you to defend yourself, to explain yourself, to break your composure. Why? Because when you react, you give away information. You reveal your weaknesses, your triggers, your breaking points. You hand your enemies a map to your vulnerabilities. But when you don't react, when you remain silent and unmoved, you become unreadable. You become a fortress. And here's the paradox, that silence isn't cold. It's not hostile. It's just fortified. It's calm that can't be breached. And that drives people crazy in the best way possible. Because they can't manipulate what they can't move. I've seen this play out in real life in the most mundane settings. Someone says something cutting in a meeting, clearly trying to rattle you. Everyone watches to see how you'll respond. The old you would have defended yourself immediately, gotten flustered, maybe said something you regret. But you've trained differently. You pause. You breathe. You let the words land and evaporate. You stay silent for 3 seconds that feel like 3 years. And then you continue with what you were saying as if nothing happened. Or you smile slightly and say something measured and calm. What has happened? You kept your power. You didn't give them the reaction they were fishing for. You didn't reveal your wound. You remained sovereign. And that person will think twice before trying that again because you've shown them they can't predict you, they can't control you, they can't make you dance. This is what Han Fei meant by invisible authority. It's the power that doesn't announce itself. The control that doesn't need to prove itself. The strength that sits so deep it doesn't need to flex. And the foundation of that authority is simple. You don't react. You respond. And there's a universe of difference between those two words. Reacting is automatic. It's what happens when the emotion is in charge. Someone pushes your button and you immediately push back. Stimulus and response with no gap. No choice. Just reflex. Like a dog that barks when the doorbell rings. It can't help it. It's wired that way. Responding is intentional. It's what happens when you're in charge of the emotion. Someone pushes your button and you feel the surge. You notice it. You name it. You breathe through it. And then you choose what comes next based on what serves you, not what the emotion demands. There's a gap, a pause, a moment where you reclaim sovereignty. And here's the thing. Most people never learn to create that gap. They live their entire lives on autopilot, reacting to everything. Something happens, and they immediately feel, and feeling immediately becomes action, and action immediately becomes consequence. They're not choosing their lives. They're being chosen by whatever stimulus is loudest. But you don't have to live that way. You can train the gap. You can make it wider. You can practice pausing even when everything in you wants to explode. And in that pause, You become free. Not free from feeling. Free from being ruled by feeling. And that's the freedom that actually matters. Let me give you another principle. Emotions are like muscles, not guests. Most people treat emotions like guests. They arrive uninvited and you have to accommodate them. Sadness shows up and you have to cancel your plans. Anxiety knocks on the door and you have to let it rearrange your whole day. Fear comes to visit and you have to give the master bedroom and sleep on the couch. You treat emotions like they own the house and you're just the tenant. But emotions aren't guests. They're muscles. And muscles respond to how you train them. If you go to the gym and lift weights, your muscles get stronger. If you sit on the couch for a year, they atrophy. They adapt to what you demand of them. Your emotions work exactly the same way. If you obey fear every single time it speaks, if you avoid every uncomfortable situation, if you retreat every time anxiety suggests you're not safe, what do you think happens to your fear? It gets stronger. It gets louder. It gets bolder. Because you've trained it to believe it's in charge. You've taught it that when it barks, you jump. So it barks more and louder because it works. But if you acknowledge fear and then act despite it, if you feel the anxiety and still walk toward the thing that scares you, if you notice the panic and breathe through it and keep going, what happens? The fear learns it's not in command. It learns it can scream all it wants, but you're still going to do what serves you. And over time, just like a muscle that's been trained, it adapts. It gets quieter, not because it's gone, but because it knows it's not in charge anymore. This is one of the most important things you need to understand. Emotions are not fixed. They're not permanent personality traits. They're patterns that have been reinforced, and patterns can be changed. But you have to stop treating them like whether you have no control over and start treating them like behaviors you're either strengthening or weakening every single day. Every time you avoid something because you're anxious, you make anxiety stronger. Every time you lash out because you're angry, you make rage more reflexive. Every time you isolate because you're sad, you teach sadness that isolation works. You're training. The question is, what are you training for? Are you training your emotions to run your life or to inform your life? There's another principle that's going to sound contradictory at first, but it's actually the key to everything. True control isn't rigidity. It's fluidity with boundaries. Let me explain. When most people hear emotional control, they imagine someone stiff, robotic, unable to bend. They imagine a person who's so controlled they're brittle. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. A soldier in combat isn't rigid. They're incredibly fluid. They adapt to changing circumstances. They move with the situation. They're dynamic and responsive. But they're fluid within clear boundaries. They don't abandon their mission. They don't desert their unit. They don't make decisions from panic. They're flexible in tactics, but immovable in principles. That's the kind of emotional control you want to build. You want to be fluid enough to feel everything, to adapt to every situation, to respond to nuance. But you want to be bounded by your values, your long-term vision, your chosen identity. So when fear says run, you can bend with it. Maybe you do retreat tactically. Maybe you do take a break, but you don't abandon the mission. When anger says destroy, you can feel the heat. You can acknowledge the injustice, but you don't cross the boundary of your integrity. This is so important because a lot of emotional control advice makes people rigid. They think control means never feeling, never bending, never showing vulnerability. And that's just emotional suppression wearing a mask. Real control is being like water. Water is soft and fluid. It fills whatever container it's in. It bends around obstacles, but also carves through stone over time. It's flexible and unstoppable at once. You want your emotional life to be like that. Flexible enough to feel joy fully, to grieve deeply, to love without armor. But structured enough that no single emotion can flood the banks and destroy everything you've built. Bounded enough that you can say, I feel this, and I'm still choosing that. Now, let me talk about something Han Fei understood that almost no modern advice captures. He talked about strategic vulnerability. And this is where the philosophy stops being cold and reveals its deepest wisdom. Han Fei never advocated heartlessness. He never said, don't love, don't connect, don't trust. What he said was choose when you reveal yourself. Choose when you're vulnerable. Make it strategic, not accidental. There's immense power in showing emotion, but only when you choose to. When you cry with someone you trust, that creates a bond. When you show anger in defense of something you believe in, that demonstrates your values. When you express joy in celebration with your people, that builds community. These emotional displays are powerful precisely because they're chosen. They're gifts you give. They're not leaks. They're not accidents. They're strategic revelations of your humanity. But when you leak emotion unconsciously, when you cry in front of people who will use it against you, when you show fear to competitors who are looking for weakness, when you display rage in ways that damage your reputation and relationships, that's not authenticity. That's giving away state secrets. That's showing your hand in a poker game when you meant to bluff. The difference between strategic vulnerability and emotional incontinence is intention. One creates intimacy and influence. The other creates exposure and exploitation. And you get to choose which one you're doing. Every single time. Think about the people you respect most. The ones who have real gravitas, real presence, real power. They're not emotionless. In fact, when they show emotion, it hits harder because it's rare and real and chosen. When they laugh, everyone wants to laugh with them. When they show concern, people listen. When they get angry, it means something. Why? Because they're not leaking constantly. They're not emotionally incontinent. They've created a container for their emotional life that makes their expressions meaningful. That's what you're building. Not a wall. A container. Not numbness. Discipline. Not coldness. Sovereignty. And the more you practice this, the more you realize something incredible. The less you obey your emotions, the more you can actually feel them. Because you're not afraid of them anymore. You're not terrified that one surge of feeling will ruin your life. You know you can feel the full force of rage and not act on it. You can feel crushing sadness and still get out of bed. You can feel overwhelming fear and still take the next step. When your emotions aren't in charge, they stop being the enemy. They become information. They become color. They become the rich texture of being human. And you can let yourself feel them fully because you know feeling them doesn't mean obeying them. This is the paradox people miss. They think emotional control means feeling less. It actually means you get to feel more because you're not scared of your own inner world anymore. You're not avoiding certain emotions because you're afraid they'll take over. You can let yourself feel everything because you've trained the muscle of choice. The gap between feeling and action. So how do you actually build this? How do you move from theory to practice? How do you train your inner army when it's been running wild for years or shut down completely? Let me give you some specific practices that work. Not theory. Actual tools you can use starting right now. The first practice I want you to try is something I call the 5-second sovereign. Here's how it works. The next time a strong emotion surges, fear, anger, sadness, whatever, I want you to pause for 5 seconds before doing anything. Not 5 minutes, not an hour, just 5 seconds. Count them slowly in your head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now here's what's important. During those 5 seconds, you're not trying to make the emotion go away. You're not suppressing it or denying it. You're just creating space. You're inserting a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, you ask yourself one question. Does this feeling want me to act, or does it just want me to react? That question is everything. Because acting means moving toward your goals, your values, your chosen direction. Reacting means moving away from discomfort, away from threat, in whatever direction the emotion pushes you. Acting is intentional. Reacting is reflexive. And you can't know which one you're doing if you don't pause. This 5-second pause is how soldiers train. They drill this gap until it becomes automatic. They practice pausing under pressure until the pause is there even when chaos is everywhere. You're training the same reflex. You're training your nervous system to believe that there's always a moment between what happens to you and what you do about it. And in that moment, you're free. Start small. You don't have to do this in life or death situations. Practice when someone cuts you off in traffic. Practice when you get a critical email. Practice when you're anxious about a meeting. 5 seconds. Feel it fully. Then ask, act or react, and choose. Even if you choose to react, you've made it a choice instead of a reflex. And that changes everything. The second practice is naming the lobbyist. This one sounds simple, but it's devastatingly effective. When an emotion rises, name it out loud, like it's a person lobbying for something. Say it in words. Fear is lobbying for retreat. Anger is lobbying for destruction. Sadness is lobbying for isolation. Anxiety is lobbying for avoidance. Why does this work? Because it creates distance. The moment you name the emotion as something separate from you, you're no longer inside it. You're observing it. And what you can observe, you can govern. It's the difference between I am terrified and fear is here trying to convince me I'm in danger. One makes you the feeling. The other makes you the observer of the feeling. This is ancient wisdom. Buddhist monks call it noting. Cognitive therapists call it diffusion. Han Fei called it maintaining the sovereign position. But whatever you call it, the practice is the same. You create linguistic distance between your identity and your emotional state. You stop saying I'm anxious and start saying anxiety is present. You stop saying I'm furious and start saying anger is making a case for retaliation. And once you've named it, you can respond to it like you'd respond to any lobbyist. You can say thank you for that input. I'll take it under advisement. You could say I hear your concerns, but I'm going to make a different choice. You can even say I appreciate you trying to protect me, but that's not the move right now. You're not dismissing the emotion. You're just making it clear who's in charge. The third practice is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's critical. I call it scheduled emotional release. Here's how it works. Set a specific time every day, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, where you give yourself full permission to feel everything. Journal, cry, rage, whatever needs to come up. But you contain it to that window. Outside that window, you're on duty. You're the soldier. You're the sovereign. But inside that window, you let everything out. Why does this work? Because it teaches your emotions that they have space, but not sovereignty. It's like telling a child you can play, but only in the playroom. Not in the kitchen, not in the living room, not in the street. There are boundaries. And boundaries don't mean no. They mean yes here. No everywhere else. When you practice this, something interesting happens. Your emotions start to trust you. They stop needing to hijack random moments throughout the day because they know they have dedicated space. It's like how if you tell yourself you can never eat chocolate again, you'll obsess over chocolate constantly. But if you tell yourself you can have chocolate on Saturday, suddenly the craving has less power. Because it's not forbidden. It's just scheduled. This is not suppression. Suppression is pretending the emotion doesn't exist. This is containment. You're acknowledging it fully, giving it space, and then setting a boundary around when and where it gets expression. And over time, you'll notice that the emotions start to settle. They become less volatile. Not because they're being ignored, but because they're being heard, on your terms, not theirs. The fourth practice is a mantra you can use in high-pressure moments. Before you walk into a difficult conversation, before you face something that scares you, before you enter any situation where your emotions might try to run the show, say this to yourself. I am unmoved by what does not serve me. Say it out loud or silently. Let be your anchor. Notice the phrasing. Now I don't feel, but I don't obey. Now I'm numb to this, but I'm unmoved by this. There's a world of difference. You're not cutting off your emotional experience. You're declaring that it doesn't get to dictate your behavior. You can feel the fear and still be unmoved. You can feel the anger and still be unmoved. You can feel the sadness and still be unmoved. This mantra reframes control as choice instead of suppression. It reminds you that being moved by your emotions is optional, that you can acknowledge them, feel them, and still plant your feet and refuse to be pushed off course. And the more you say this, the more it becomes true. You're training your identity. You're declaring who you are. You're someone who feels everything and obeys only what serves. Now let me tell you what's going to happen as you practice these things. At first, it's going to feel impossible. Your emotions are used to running the show. They're used to you obeying immediately. So when you start pausing, when you start naming them, when you start choosing your response, they're going to scream louder. They're going to surge harder. They're going to test whether you really mean it. This is normal. This is actually a good sign. It means you're changing the pattern. When you start lifting weights, your muscles ache. When you start running, your lungs burn. That discomfort is proof you're building something new. The same thing happens with emotional training. The emotion throws a tantrum because it's losing control, and you have to stay steady through that tantrum. There's going to be moments where you fail, where you react instead of respond, where you let fear drive, where you lash out in anger, where you collapse in sadness. That's okay. That's part of training. Soldiers don't master themselves in a day. They drill. They fail. They try again. They fail differently. They adjust. They improve. You're in the same process. The key is not perfection. The key is direction. Are you moving towards sovereignty or away from it? Are you building the muscle or letting it atrophy? Every single moment is a training opportunity. Every surge of emotion is a chance to practice the pause. Every reaction you catch is a small victory. You're not trying to become perfect. You're trying to become stronger. And as you practice, as you train, something shifts. You start to notice the gap between feeling and action getting wider. You start to notice yourself pausing automatically. You start to notice emotions rising, and instead of immediately being inside them, you're watching them. You're curious about them. You're gathering information from them. But they're not in the driver's seat anymore. You are. And that's when the real power starts to show up. You walk into rooms differently. You handle conflict differently. You face your fears differently. Not because you're emotionless, but because you're disciplined. Not because you don't care, but because you care so much that you refuse to let reflexive emotions sabotage what matters. People notice. They might not be able to name what's different about you, but they feel it. You're more grounded, more present, less reactive, more trustworthy. There's a weight to you that wasn't there before. A quiet authority that doesn't need to prove itself. That's what Han Fei's philosophy builds. That's what cold power looks like in a human being. But here's what I want you to understand more than anything else. This isn't about becoming hard. It's not about closing your heart. It's not about never crying or never feeling joy or never being spontaneous. It's about knowing that you have a choice. Always. In every moment. No matter how strong the emotion, no matter how overwhelming the sensation, you have a gap. A pause. A moment where you can choose. And in that choice is your humanity. Not in the reflexive reaction. Not in the uncontrolled outburst. Not in being swept away by every wave. Your humanity lives in the gap. In the space where you feel everything and still choose what serves your highest self, your deepest values, your long-term vision. This is what it means to be free. Not free from feeling. Free in your feeling. Not disconnected from your emotions. Sovereign over them. And once you taste that freedom, once you experience what it's like to feel fear and not run, to feel anger and not destroy, to feel sadness and not collapse, you'll never want to go back. Because you'll realize you've been living in a prison you didn't even know existed. A prison where your emotions were the guards, and you thought that was just how life worked. Let me tell you about what happens next. Because there's a stage beyond just managing your emotions. There's a stage where you start to use them strategically, where you become so fluent in your inner world that you can deploy emotion like a tool. This is advanced level work. This is what Han Fei was really pointing toward. Imagine being able to access righteous anger when you need to defend a boundary. Not because you're out of control, but because anger is the appropriate tool for that moment. Imagine being able to summon fierce determination when everything looks hopeless. Not because you're faking it, but because you've trained that emotional state and you can call it up when needed. Imagine being able to sit in deep sadness to honor a loss without it destroying your functionality. You can grieve and still go to work. You can mourn and still show up for people who need you. This is what emotional mastery actually looks like. It's not the absence of feeling. It's fluency in feeling. It's having access to the full range of human emotion and knowing which one serves you in which moment. And being able to shift between them not because you're manipulative, but because you're skilled. Think about a musician. When they first learn an instrument, they're clumsy. They hit wrong notes. They can't control the sound. But as they practice, as they train, they develop mastery. And mastery doesn't mean they only play one note. It means they can play any note, any chord, any song. They have access to the full range of the instrument. That's what you're building with your emotional life. Right now, for most people, emotions play them. They're the instrument and the emotion is the musician. Whatever feeling shows up plays whatever song it wants. You're just the instrument being used. But through this training, you become the musician. You still have the full instrument. You can still play every note. But you choose the song. You choose the tempo. You choose when to play loud and when to play soft. And here's where it gets really interesting. When you develop this level of mastery, you start to see emotions in other people with incredible clarity. You can read the room. You can sense when someone is lying because their emotional display doesn't match their words. You can feel when someone is afraid, even if they're trying to hide it. You can recognize manipulation because you understand the mechanics of emotional leverage. This isn't about becoming cold or calculating. It's about developing emotional intelligence at the highest level. You understand the game because you've mastered it in yourself. And that understanding makes you much harder to manipulate, much harder to control, much harder to provoke, because you see the attempt. You recognize the strategy, and you can choose whether to play along or not. Han Fei wrote extensively about this. He said that the master strategist appears to have no strategy. The master of power appears to use no power. Why? Because their control is so complete, it looks natural. It looks effortless. They're not trying hard to manage themselves. They just are managed. The discipline has become identity. That's the end game. Not trying to control yourself. Being controlled. Not working to manage emotions. Being someone who is managed. The training becomes who you are. And at that point, it's not effort anymore. It's just how you exist in the world. But I want to be really clear about something. This journey isn't about perfection. You're going to have moments where you slip, where you react, where emotions get the better of you. And that's part of being human. The goal isn't to never be emotional. The goal is to catch yourself faster, to recognize it sooner, to recover quicker, to learn from each time you lose sovereignty and get better at maintaining it. I've been practicing this for years, and I still have moments where fear grabs me and I freeze, where anger flares and I say something sharper than I meant to, where sadness hits and I want to just give up. The difference is now I recognize it happening. I see it in real time, and I can usually course correct within seconds or minutes instead of hours or days. That's progress, not perfection. Progress. You're building a skill, and skills develop over time with practice. Some days you'll feel like a master. Other days you'll feel like a beginner. That's normal. That's the path. The key is staying on the path. Keep training. Keep practicing. Keep choosing sovereignty even when it's hard. Now let me address something that might be bothering you. You might be thinking this sounds exhausting, like you have to be constantly monitoring yourself, constantly managing, constantly in control. And I get why it might seem that way. But here's what actually happens. At first, yes, it takes effort. It takes attention. You have to consciously pause, consciously name the emotion, consciously choose your response. It's like learning to drive. Every movement is deliberate. You're thinking about everything. But over time, it becomes automatic. The pause becomes reflexive. The naming becomes instantaneous. The choosing becomes natural. And at that point, it's not exhausting. It's liberating. Because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not in constant battle with your emotions. You're dancing with them. They rise, you acknowledge, you move. It's fluid. It's graceful. It takes less energy, not more. Think about an athlete. When they're learning a technique, it's awkward and tiring. But once they've mastered it, it looks effortless. They're not thinking about every movement. It's integrated. It's embodied. That's where you're headed. You're not trying to think your way through every emotional moment for the rest of your life. You're training until the mastery is embodied, until sovereignty is your default state. And when you get there, when you reach that level of integration, something beautiful happens. You become more emotional, not less, because you're not scared of your feelings anymore. You can let yourself feel joy without worrying it will make you reckless. You can let yourself feel love without fearing it will make you weak. You can let yourself feel grief without thinking it will break you. Because, deeply know that feeling something doesn't mean obeying it. You can feel everything and still stay in your power. This is the gift Han Fei is offering. Not a life without emotion. A life where emotion serves you instead of ruling you. A life where you have the full spectrum of human feeling available to you, without being enslaved by any of it. A life where you can be soft and strong at once, vulnerable and powerful, open and protected. Let me tell you one more story before we get to the practical application. There's a tale from ancient China about a swordsmith who was commissioned by a king to create the perfect weapon. The smith worked for months, trying different metals, different temperatures, different techniques. He created sword after sword, but none of them satisfied him. They were either too hard and brittle, shattering on impact, or too soft and flexible, bending under pressure. Finally, after many failures, he discovered the secret. He needed to fold the metal. Hard and soft, brittle and flexible, steel and iron, folded together hundreds of times. The resulting blade had both qualities simultaneously. It was hard enough to hold an edge and cut through armor, but flexible enough to bend without breaking under stress. It was the perfect balance. That sword became legendary. It was called the blade that cannot be broken, not because it never bent, but because it bent without shattering and returned to true. You are forging that blade. You're learning to be hard and soft, disciplined and flexible, controlled and feeling. You're folding those qualities together through practice until they're integrated, until you're someone who can face any pressure, any emotion, any challenge, and bend without breaking. Someone who always returns to true. And that's not some distant ideal. That's achievable. That's practical. That's what these practices build. Every time you pause instead of react, you're folding the metal. Every time you name the emotion instead of being consumed by it, you're tempering the blade. Every time you choose response over reaction, you're sharpening the edge. You're creating something in yourself that cannot be broken. Now let's talk about what this looks like in real life, in your actual day-to-day existence. Because philosophy is beautiful, but you need to know how to apply this when your boss is yelling at you, when your partner is upset with you, when you're anxious about money, when you're grieving a loss. How do you actually be a sovereign in the mess of real human life? Here's the truth. You practice in low-stakes moments, so you're ready for high-stakes moments. You don't wait for a crisis to start training. You train every day in small ways so that when the real pressure comes, you have the muscle memory. When you're stuck in traffic and you feel frustration rising, that's training. When someone is rude to you at the grocery store and you feel anger flashing, that's training. When you wake up anxious about the day ahead, that's training. Every single emotional moment is a repetition in the gym, and you need hundreds, thousands of reps before the training holds under real pressure. So you start there, in the boring, mundane, everyday moments. You practice the pause. You practice the naming. You practice the choosing. And you do it when the stakes are low, so that when the stakes are high, the training is there. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're in a meeting and someone criticizes your work in front of everyone. Your immediate emotional response is probably shame, embarrassment, maybe anger. Your body heats up. Your heart rate spikes. Your mind starts racing with defensive thoughts. Every instinct is screaming, defend yourself, explain, justify, attack back. The untrained response is to immediately act on those instincts, to get defensive, to lash out, to shut down. Whatever your particular pattern is, you do it reflexively, and later you regret it. You replayed it in your head 1,000 times, wishing you'd handled it differently. But if you've been training, here's what happens instead. The emotion surges. You feel all of it. The heat, the embarrassment, the anger. But you practice the pause, so it's there automatically. 5 seconds. You breathe. You feel your feet on the floor. You notice the emotion without being consumed by it. You name it silently. Embarrassment is here. Anger is lobbying for retaliation. Fear is suggesting I look weak. And in that pause, you choose. You decide that what serves you here is not defense or attack, but curiosity and professionalism. So you say something like, "That's interesting feedback. Can you be more specific about what didn't work for you so I can understand your perspective?" You're not pretending you don't feel embarrassed or angry. You're just not letting those emotions choose your words. What has happened? You kept your dignity. You didn't give them the reaction they might have wanted. You showed emotional maturity that makes you look stronger, not weaker. You gathered more information instead of getting defensive. And you stayed in your power. That's mastery. That's sovereignty. That's what the training builds. And here's the beautiful part. After moments like that, the emotion settles faster. Because you didn't feed it. You didn't amplify it by acting on it. You acknowledged it, you felt it, and then you chose a different path. And your nervous system learns. It learns that emotions can surge and you can handle them. It learns that you don't have to obey every impulse. It learns to trust you. And over time, the surges get less intense. Not because you're suppressing, but because your system knows you're in control. This works with every emotion. With fear when you're about to do something scary. With sadness when you've experienced loss. With joy when you want to celebrate. You're not eliminating the feeling. You're choosing how it expresses. When to let it out fully and when to contain it. And that choosing is freedom. Now I want to talk about something subtle but crucial. There's a difference between emotional control and emotional rigidity. And you need to understand this difference or you'll end up in the wrong place. Rigidity is when you have rules about emotions. When you think certain feelings are weak or wrong or bad. When you judge yourself for feeling. When you create a narrow, acceptable range and try to force yourself to stay in it. That's not what we're building. That's just another form of being controlled. Except now you're being controlled by shame instead of by the emotion itself. That's not better. That's just different suffering. What we're building is flexibility with direction. You can feel anything. Any emotion is acceptable. Any surge is valid. But you still choose the action. You're flexible in feeling and directed in choosing. That's the balance. So when fear comes, you don't say fear is weak. I shouldn't feel this. You say fear is here. That's okay. And I'm going to move forward anyway. When sadness comes, you don't say I need to be strong. I can't cry. You say sadness is here. I'll give it space when appropriate. And right now I need to function, so I'm containing it for later. When anger comes, you don't say anger is bad. I'm a bad person for feeling this. You say anger is here. It's pointing towards something that matters to me, and I'm going to address that in a way that serves me. Do you see the difference? You're not at war with your emotions. You're in relationship with them. A relationship where you're the parent and they're the children. You love them. You listen to them. You take care of them. But you make the final decisions. They don't run the house. This is so important because a lot of people take emotional discipline and turn it into emotional suppression wearing a different mask. They think being controlled means never feeling intensely, never being vulnerable, never showing emotion. And they become brittle. They become disconnected. They become the person who seems strong, but is actually just frozen. That's not power. That's paralysis. Real power is being able to feel intensely and still function. Being able to be vulnerable strategically. Being able to show emotion when it serves connection and contain it when it doesn't. That's mastery. And mastery is flexible, not rigid. So as you practice, pay attention to this. Are you becoming more fluid or more frozen? Are you able to feel more or are you feeling less? Are you connecting more deeply with people or isolating more? If you're moving toward rigidity, toward numbness, toward disconnection, you're going the wrong direction. Course correct. Remember the goal is sovereignty, not shutdown. Let me give you another practice that helps with this. It's called emotional inventory. Once a week, sit down and actually name all the emotions you felt that week. Write them down. Don't judge them. Don't analyze them yet. Just list them. I felt anxious about the presentation. I felt joy when I talked to my friend. I felt sadness thinking about my father. I felt anger at that comment someone made. I felt pride in finishing that project. Just name them all. Then look at the list and ask yourself 2 questions. First, which of these emotions did I choose my response to? Which ones did I pause, name, and respond to with intention? Give yourself credit for those. Celebrate them. You're building a skill, and every success matters. Second, which of these emotions ran me? Which ones did I react to instead of respond to? Which ones took control and made me do things I regret or wish I'd done differently? Don't beat yourself up about these. Just notice them. They're showing you where you need more training, where the muscle is still weak, where you need more practice. This inventory does something powerful. It keeps you honest. It prevents you from either thinking you're perfect or thinking you're failing. It gives you accurate data about your progress. and it helps you see patterns. Maybe you notice you handle anger well, but fear still runs you. Or you're good with sadness, but anxiety hijacks you every time. That information tells you where to focus your training. And here's what you'll notice over time. The list of emotions you respond to instead of react to gets longer. The list of emotions that run you gets shorter. Not because you're feeling less, but because you're mastering more. And that visible progress, that concrete evidence that you're changing, that's incredibly motivating. It keeps you going. Now I want to talk about the hardest part of all of this. The thing that stops most people from developing real emotional mastery. And that's the fear of losing yourself. There's a voice that says if I control my emotions, if I don't just follow what I feel, I'll become someone I'm not. I'll lose my authenticity. I'll become fake or manipulative or disconnected from my true self. And I want you to hear this clearly. That fear makes sense, but it's based on a misunderstanding of what you are. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences emotions. You are the consciousness that feels. You are the sovereign that governs. The emotions are part of your experience, but they're not your identity. When you stop letting emotions run you, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself. You discover who you actually are underneath all the reactive patterns. You discover the person who can choose. The person who has values and vision. The person who decides instead of being decided for. That's not losing authenticity. That's discovering it. Think about it this way. Is a person more authentic when they're drunk or sober? When they're in a rage or when they're calm? When they're in a panic or when they're grounded? The drunk, rageful, panicked version isn't more real. It's just more uncontrolled. Authenticity isn't about being unfiltered. It's about being aligned with your deepest values, your truest self, your highest vision. And here's the paradox. When you develop emotional mastery, when you're no longer being run by reactive patterns, you actually become more authentic. Because now your actions come from your values instead of your wounds. Your words come from your wisdom instead of your triggers. Your choices come from your vision instead of your fear. That's more you, not less you. So if that voice comes up, if you start worrying that you're becoming someone you're not, pause and ask, am I becoming less authentic or am I becoming less reactive? Am I losing myself or am I finding myself? Am I becoming fake or am I becoming intentional? The answers to those questions will guide you. And remember, you can always feel more if you want to. You can always let the emotion out more fully. The control gives you options. You can choose to be more expressive, more vulnerable, more open. But you can't choose those things if you don't have control in the first place. If emotions are running you, you don't get to choose when to open up or when to protect yourself. The emotion chooses. But if you're sovereign, if you have mastery, you can choose to be vulnerable. You can choose to be expressive. You can choose to be emotional. And those choices make the expression more powerful, not less. Let me talk about one more thing before we wrap up. And that's what happens when you live this way for a while. What happens when emotional sovereignty becomes your default? Because the transformation isn't just internal. It ripples out into every area of your life. Your relationships change. People trust you more because you're steady. They feel safer with you because you're not going to explode or collapse unexpectedly. They respect you more because you don't get pulled into drama or manipulation. You become someone people want to be around not because you're always happy, but because you're always grounded. Your work changes. You handle pressure better. You make decisions from clarity instead of panic. You don't get rattled by setbacks or criticism. You can take feedback without getting defensive. You can lead without needing to control. You become more effective, more influential, more valuable. Not because you work harder, but because you're not wasting energy on emotional reactivity. Your inner world changes. You sleep better because you're not lying awake replaying emotional reactions. You have more energy because you're not exhausted from constant internal drama. You trust yourself more because you've proven you can handle your emotions instead of being handled by them. You feel more peaceful, more free, more alive. Not because you feel less, but because you're not imprisoned by what you feel. This is what Han Fei's philosophy delivers. Not a life without emotion. A life where emotion is power instead of prison. where feeling is information instead of command, where you get to be fully human without being ruled by any single part of your humanity. And here's what I really want you to understand. This isn't just some philosophical idea. This is practical wisdom that works. I've seen it work in my own life. I've seen it work in the lives of people who practice it. It's not magic. It's training. It's discipline. It's choosing sovereignty over and over until sovereignty chooses you. You can do this. You can build this. You already have everything you need. You have emotions to train. You have moments to practice in. You have the gap between stimulus and response. You have the ability to pause, to name, to choose. That's all you need. The rest is just repetition, just training, just showing up every day and practicing until the practice becomes who you are. So let me bring this home. Let me give you the core truth you need to remember. You came here today feeling like your emotions were in charge. Maybe they've been running your life for years, maybe for your whole life. Deciding when you speak up and when you hide. Deciding when you try and when you give up. Deciding when you connect and when you isolate. You've been living as a subject in a kingdom where emotions are the rulers. And it's exhausting. And it's limiting. And somewhere deep inside, you've known there has to be another way. And there is. The other way is becoming sovereign. Taking back the throne that was always yours. Not by eliminating emotions, but by organizing them. Not by shutting down, but by waking up. Not by feeling less, but by obeying less. And the path to that sovereignty is training. Just like a soldier trains their body to move under pressure, you train your will to choose under emotion. You start with the pause. 5 seconds between feeling and doing. 5 seconds where you reclaim your agency. And you practice that pause in every small moment until it's there in the big ones. You name the emotion like a lobbyist making a case. You thank it for its input. And then you decide from your throne, from your values, from your vision. And you do this over and over, in traffic and in meetings, in conflicts and in quiet moments, until choosing becomes natural. And gradually, slowly, through hundreds of small practices, you transform. The emotions that used to run you become forces you can deploy. The fear that used to paralyze you becomes information you can use. The anger that used to destroy you becomes energy you can channel. The sadness that used to consume you becomes depth you can honor without being swallowed by. You become fluid and fierce at once, feeling and functional, human and sovereign. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's about being able to feel the full storm of human emotion and stand unmoved in the center of it. Not unmoved because you're numb. Unmoved because you're rooted. Because you've built something in yourself that cannot be shaken. A core of sovereignty that says I feel everything and obey only what serves me. That's the gift of Han Fei's philosophy. That's the power of the soldier's discipline applied to your inner world. And that's what's available to you if you're willing to train. Not someday. Not after you fix yourself or heal yourself or find yourself. Right now. In the next moment, when an emotion surges and you pause instead of react. That's where it starts. That's where everything changes. You're not broken for feeling too much. You're untrained. And training starts with one choice. The next time emotion surges, you pause. You name it. You thank it for its input. And then you decide. Not from numbness. Not from fear of feeling. But from the quiet, unshakable place inside you that knows, I am the one in command here. That place has always existed. Han Fei didn't invent it. He just reminded us it's there. Waiting. Ready. Sovereign. And every time you practice, every time you choose instead of react, you strengthen that place. You build that muscle. You forge that blade that cannot be broken. And over time, through practice, through repetition, through dedication, you become someone you maybe didn't believe you could be. Someone who walks into chaos and doesn't flinch. Someone who feels deeply and chooses wisely. Someone who has transformed their emotions from tyrants into tools. That person is already in you. They're not somewhere in the future after years of work. They're right now, underneath the reactivity, underneath the patterns, underneath the conditioning. They're the version of you that pauses, that names, that chooses. And every time you practice, You're not creating that person. You're revealing them. You're clearing away everything that's been covering them up. All the habits, all the fears, all the beliefs that told you emotions had to run you. So if this resonates with you, if you felt something shift as you've been listening, I want you to know what that feeling is. That's recognition. That's your sovereign self recognizing its own reflection. That's the part of you that knows you're capable of this mastery, that's been waiting for permission to take command, that's been ready all along. And here's what I want you to do with that recognition. First, I want you to practice one thing today. Just one. The next time an emotion surges, pause for 5 seconds. Don't try to change it. Don't try to fix it. Just pause. Count slowly. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe. And in that pause, ask yourself, does this feeling want me to act or react? That's it. That's your starting point. That 5-second gap is where your freedom lives. Second, I want you to let me know in the comments which part of this landed hardest for you. Was it the story of the general who tested his soldiers? Was it the idea that emotions are lobbyists, not truth? Was it the practice of naming? Was it something else entirely? Tell me what hit you, what shifted something in you, because that's your growth edge. That's where your training needs to focus. And when you name it, when you share it, you make it more real. You commit to it. And third, if you want more of this, if you want to go deeper into philosophy that doesn't sugarcoat the path to power, that doesn't pretend transformation is easy, but shows you it's possible, subscribe to this channel. Because this is what we do here. We take ancient wisdom and make it practical. We take hard truths and make them actionable. We talk about real mastery, not fake positivity. And we do it together, as people who are done being ruled by their inner chaos and ready to become sovereign. You're not lost. You're not broken. You're not too emotional or too weak or too far gone. You're just at the beginning of training. And the training is simple. Not easy, but simple. Pause. Name. Choose. Over and over, in small moments and big ones, until choosing becomes who you are. Until sovereignty is your identity, not your effort. And when you get there, when you taste that freedom, you'll look back at this moment and realize this is when everything changed. Not when you finally controlled your emotions, but when you decided to start training them. When you stopped being their subject and became their sovereign. When you remembered that you were always meant to be the one in command. That's who you are. That's who you're becoming. Not someone who doesn't feel. Someone who feels everything and bows to nothing that doesn't serve them. Welcome to your sovereignty. Welcome to your training. Welcome home.